The town of Derry did not announce itself to newcomers with banners or welcome signs, because Derry had no need to advertise the horrors it harbored. Instead, it greeted the unwary with a slow, creeping silence, a kind of pause in the air, where the wind itself seemed reluctant to move, and the shadows along the streets clung to walls and corners as if they had their own memory. Terence Fitzgerald had driven this stretch of highway more times than he cared to remember, but there was a tightness in his chest as the familiar contours of Maine's forests gave way to the gray, slightly crooked houses of Derry, the kind that looked like they had been built without care and then left to sag, unmonitored, for decades. And he could not shake the feeling that the town itself was watching, listening, waiting. He glanced at the rearview mirror, catching the slight tilt of his wife Wanda's face as she watched the road, her mouth set in a thin, determined line, and then at his stepdaughter Cyan, who sat quietly beside her, eyes fixed on the window, pupils dilated in that calm, unsettling way that sometimes belonged to children who had glimpsed something they were not meant to understand. Terence knew, as he always did in moments like this, that the world could be divided into things one could handle and things one could not. And Derry was firmly in the latter category. His experience with the Bureau, with covert operations and the shadows behind the curtains of power, had taught him a kind of hardened intuition, a sense that some predators were visible and others were not. Some crimes left blood and evidence and screams, and others left only emptiness and the faint whisper of something ancient and patient, waiting for a mistake. As the tires crunched over the loose gravel of the side road leading into the old part of the town, Terence's hand tightened over the wheel, and he could feel the weight of the city pressing through the windshield, seeping in through the seams of the car as if Derry itself had hands and eyes, and the hairs along his neck rose despite the warmth of the late summer afternoon. Wanda said nothing, but her knuckles whitened on the edge of the seat. Cyan's voice did not disturb the car's tense quiet. She merely leaned forward slightly, studying the town with the unnerving attentiveness that children who had survived shadows often possessed. She had the look of one who remembered things that were not meant to be remembered, who could sense danger even when no one else could. And Terence's jaw tightened because he realized that she might be more aware of what waited here than he could ever hope to be. The houses loomed as if they were leaning closer, listening for something, waiting for someone, and the streetlights, though pale and flickering, cast elongated shadows that stretched and bent unnaturally, touching the edges of lawns and curbs as if to test the boundaries of the reality around them. Far above the streets, where the clouds gathered in heavy gray folds, there was a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, like the heat haze rising from asphalt in a city's summer. Terence's eyes caught it for just a moment before it disappeared. But that brief flicker of movement set a deep, ancient alarm ringing in his chest. It was the same sense he had felt years ago when he first encountered the impossible, when the veil between what was real and what was not had thinned and revealed that the world had corners and gaps filled with things that should not exist. He swallowed, forcing his throat to relax, and reminded himself that this was a town, a place on a map, with people who ate breakfast and mowed their lawns. And yet, even as he told himself this, he could feel the presence of something watching, a thing older than the roads, older than the trees, older than the small, shivering human bodies that sometimes vanished along this very path. And he knew without hesitation that the threat that awaited them here would not be a man, or even a man-shaped thing. It would be something that delighted in amusement, in cruelty, in the exquisite perfection of terror. They parked outside a small, faded motel whose signs swung gently in the wind, creaking a cadence that sounded almost like laughter. Wanda helped Cyan with their bags, her movements precise, controlled, as if keeping herself busy could stave off the sinking dread that came with returning to Derry. Terence followed more slowly, feeling the air thicken with a kind of tension that made the hairs on his arms stand up and tightened his chest with the memory of another child taken, another family left hollowed out, another shadow that had learned to wear the world like a costume. He could not see it yet, but he felt it. Somewhere in the network of gutters, sewers, and dark alleys that twisted like veins beneath the town, something stirred and laughed softly, a sound that seemed too complex, too knowing, to be merely human. El, the spawn, moved like a shadow following shadows, unseen but unmissable in his effect. He had not come because he could trust anyone, nor because he could let them wander safely. He had come because the threads of fate pulled him, and he could not resist the tug. The memory of Cyan's near disappearance haunted him, as it always did in the quiet moments, and though he had tried to erase the details, to lock them away where no living mind could reach, the pull of unfinished business had led him back. He followed at a distance, keeping himself low, letting the wind and the trees mask the unnatural outline of his cloak, the chains hanging heavy and threatening, and he could hear the faintest hum in the air, a vibration that spoke of anticipation, hunger, and malevolent amusement. And he knew that the entity awaiting them below the streets had already noticed him. Pennywise emerged first, in the shape everyone remembered. The clown with the painted face that was at once ridiculous and horrifying, its eyes glinting with cruel intelligence and amusement, its posture perfectly theatrical, as if taking a bow on a stage. It stepped from the shadows, balancing on the edge of the gutter with a deliberate grace that made it clear this was not a creature that needed to move fast, because speed was irrelevant. Fear was optional, and performance was everything. Its grin stretched wider than any human jaw could allow, and it tilted its head slightly, as though judging the audience before the play even began. El froze for just a heartbeat, not out of fear, but because he recognized the pattern. This was a thing that delighted in the narrative, in the irony, in the act of trying to torment someone who was already hardened by centuries of hell and vengeance. It had found him, and yet it did not attack immediately. It simply enjoyed the tension, the theatricality, and the anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. The first clash was not physical. It was a dance of presence and willpower. Pennywise did not need El to be afraid. Indeed, the lack of fear made this even more entertaining. With a flick of its wrist, the clown shifted, its form dissolving like mist in the air, and reassembled itself as one of El's ancient enemies, the Violator Demon. All wrong angles, leering and grotesque, a perfect caricature of cruelty shaped to make the spawn flinch. And yet El did not flinch. He let the chains swing loosely at his sides, the necroplasm pulsing faintly along his arms, ready for the inevitable, aware that the entity before him was playing not out of necessity, but for amusement, for the simple, terrible joy of performance. Pennywise shifted again, becoming Mammon, looming and incomprehensibly massive, the weight of centuries pressing down as if to bend the world itself to its will. Then Malabolgia, twisting reality into jagged, impossible shapes, yet always with a grin that said clearly, "It is funny to me, watching you react, watching you struggle, watching you be challenged by what is not afraid of you. Terence, unaware of the deeper cosmology at play, watched as the air seemed to vibrate and distort, as shadows moved with their own intent, and as the faint, unnatural laughter echoed through the streets, whispering promises of hunger and chaos. He realized then that Cyan was not merely a witness to these things. She was a pivot point, a kind of gravitational anchor for the events that were about to unfold. And every instinct he had trained through years of agency work screamed that nothing he could do would keep her safe without extraordinary measures. Wanda clutched his arm, feeling the subtle changes in the air, the way the light bent around corners, the way silence itself seemed to thicken. And she understood, without words, that El was present, that the entity was present, and that what was about to happen would not be negotiable. The confrontation escalated as El descended into the sewers, chains swinging, cloak trailing like black water, and Pennywise pursued with a fluidity that mocked gravity and reason, taking the shapes of creatures long dead or locked away in the spawn's memory, each shift accompanied by laughter that was equal parts delight and derision. El struck with chains and necroplasm, his attacks precise and deadly. Yet the clown avoided, not by speed alone, but by being something that could not be fully hit, slipping between states of matter and form, mocking the very laws that governed life and death. And yet, despite the futility of a purely physical confrontation, the spawn persisted, because the child was at stake. Because vengeance and duty and the unspeakable bond of guardianship demanded he continue, regardless of amusement or risk. Hours, or perhaps minutes, for time flowed strangely here, passed as battle and theater merged. The clown laughed, and El's blows carved nothing into the intangible, while chains and necroplasm tore what should have been impossible, each strike echoing in the narrow stone corridors like thunder in a canyon. Somewhere above, the town of Derry slept, unaware, its streets quietly bleeding shadows into the gutter, as though the town itself were waiting, recording, storing every note of the encounter for a day that might never come. And then came the moment of clarity, when El realized that victory in the conventional sense was impossible. Pennywise sought only amusement, and would continue to shift, change, and torment until El reacted, and if he did not react in the way the clown desired, the game could last indefinitely. Understanding this, El made a choice. He could continue the futile physical contest, or he could act in the only way that mattered, which was to ensure the safety of Cyan at any cost. And with that, the world tilted. Chains retracted, necroplasm coiled into a protective sphere, and the spawn, knowing what must be done, prepared to return to the realm of hell itself, the place from which he had emerged countless times, to draw upon the only advantage strong enough to protect the child he had vowed to guard. The sewers of Derry were never quiet, but tonight the sounds took on a sinister cadence, as if the very pipes had grown teeth and were gnawing on the silence. Water dripped rhythmically, yet each drop seemed to echo with meaning, bouncing off the curved, blackened walls and creating a melody that only the mind attuned to terror could hear. El moved through the darkness like a shadow within shadows, chains dragging behind him with a low, metallic hiss, their movement cutting the still air as if they were slicing the threads of reality itself. Every corner he turned, every pool of stagnant water he disturbed, held the potential for the red balloons, the eerie laughter, and the sudden, inexplicable presence of that thing, the thing that wore a clown's face when it found it amusing, and the twisted visages of ancient demons when it found his memory entertaining. Pennywise's laughter was never far, though it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was not the laugh of a predator that needed fear to exist, nor the cackle of a creature desperate to feed, but the giddy delight of an artist, of someone performing for the pure amusement of the act. One moment the clown crouched on a ledge, eyes glinting with that cruel intelligence, smile stretched impossibly wide. The next, it reshaped itself into Violator, limbs contorting in grotesque angles, skin the color of bruises, teeth jagged and perfectly adapted for terror. And then Mammon, and then Malebolgia, their forms twisting the narrow stone corridors into impossibilities, each visage chosen not because El feared it, but because Pennywise delighted in the irony of forcing a creature hardened by centuries of hell to confront every enemy he had ever faced, every betrayal and torment committed against him, as if it were a costume party tailored to his history. El's chains lashed through the air, striking walls and shadows, tearing into forms that were not fully there, that flickered and dissolved upon impact, leaving only the echo of sound and the scent of sulfur and rot. His necroplasm glowed faintly, illuminating the tunnels in patches of green light, highlighting the twisting shapes that were Pennywise's projections, revealing a parade of demons and angels and men who had tried to harm him across time. Yet the spawn did not hesitate, did not recoil, because each form, each mask, each grotesque mimicry was meaningless to him if it did not endanger the child. He struck with purpose, not anger, and the energy he poured into the chains and strikes was tempered with calculation. He was aware of what this battle truly was: a performance, a test, a way for the clown to amuse itself, and every act of amusement only drew it further from reality. Above ground, Wanda and Terence moved with caution, trying to keep Cyan unaware of the full scale of what lurked beneath the streets. The child, of course, sensed everything, though she did not understand it, and her quiet observance, the way her head tilted slightly at shadows that should not have moved, unnerved them more than the sounds of the city around them. Wanda's hand rested lightly on Terence's arm, her fingers trembling, because she felt the pressure of something watching, something that weighed on the edges of thought and perception, something that had been patient for a long time and found this moment suitable for play. Terence gritted his teeth, his experience in the field screaming at him that bullets and barriers could not touch what stalked them, and that the only way to survive this night was to rely on timing, instinct, and the presence of El, who now fought beneath their feet in a world that had rules of its own making. Pennywise shifted again, a blur of motion and form, its laughter echoing off the walls and ricocheting through the labyrinthine corridors like a living thing. One moment it appeared as Jason Wynn, a man who had betrayed El countless times in life and death, a human predator with a human smile and human cunning. The next, it was a demon from the deepest pits of hell, wings spread impossibly wide, eyes glowing with the awareness of eternity. And each transformation carried with it the weight of history, the weight of those who had tormented, deceived, and hunted El, projected into a single, continuous nightmare. But El was not fooled, nor terrified. He moved like a shadow drawn to the red light of the clown's grin, chains whipping, necroplasm snaking along his arms, striking at substance and non-substance alike, aware that this was as much a contest of endurance and will as it was of physical combat. The clown's amusement grew palpable, filling the tunnels with a vibrating energy that made stone quiver and water jump in its stagnant pools. Elle noticed the subtle things, the way the air shifted just before Pennywise reshaped itself, the way laughter preceded the formation of new horrors, and he realized that this was a game that could never be won in conventional terms. Every strike he landed, every swing of the chains, was met not with pain, but with escalation, with the clown adapting instantly, testing, changing, mocking, and doing so with the glee of an artist who paints in agony and terror. And yet, he continued, because failure was not an option. Failure meant Cyan, and Cyan's life was a line drawn through the chaotic script of the clown's amusement, a line Elle could not allow to be crossed. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, the distinction meaningless under the unsteady rhythm of fear and power, as Pennywise continued to shift forms, each one more absurd and horrifying than the last, until the air was thick with the scent of sulfur, blood, and decay, a scent that clung to Elle as he moved, striking and parrying and shaping his attacks with the precision of centuries of combat experience. The necroplasm coiled and snapped, chains flew in arcs of green light, and still the clown laughed, because none of this was sufficient to satisfy it, and it would not be satisfied until the spawn showed the one reaction it craved: fear, pain, despair, or surrender. Elle had none to give, and in this he found a terrible clarity. The battle would never be measured by who landed the most blows or who drew the most blood. It would be measured by endurance, by will, and by the cost he was willing to bear for the safety of the child above. Cyan, sensing the intensity of what was happening beneath the streets, pressed herself against the cold metal railing of the motel balcony above, watching the shadows writhe and twist below, and though she did not fully understand, a part of her knew that the man she called father's protector, Elle, was fighting not merely for her life, but for something larger, something ancient, something that connected her very presence to forces that were older than memory itself. Wanda, standing behind her, whispered reassurances that sounded hollow even to her own ears, because she could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down, the sensation that no plan, no intervention, no strategy could fully shield them from the machinery of amusement and malice unfolding below. The battle reached a point where physical strikes were meaningless. Chains cut through shadows, necroplasm struck incorporeal forms, and yet the clown's laughter only rose, echoing through the tunnels and out into the streets above. Elle realized that to continue in the manner he had been was to exhaust himself and risk everything. The clown did not need to kill him physically. It only needed him to react in a way that would entertain it. And it was here, in the heart of the sewers, beneath the sleeping town of Derry, that Elle made the choice that would define the night. He would not play the game on the clown's terms. He would not react in the way that was expected. He would act in the only way that mattered, by removing himself from the battlefield in a way that protected the child, even if it meant paying a price beyond imagining. Elle remained motionless for a long, suffocating moment, the green glow of necroplasm clinging to his form like a second skin, chains coiled tightly around his arms, ready to strike if needed, yet deliberately idle. Pennywise, perched on a ledge of broken concrete above, tilted its head in confusion, then amusement, because the lack of reaction, the absence of fear or outrage, was itself a kind of joke, a new play for it to explore. And it laughed, long and drawn out, a sound that echoed through the tunnels, seeping into the walls and water, vibrating in the air like a low, malevolent symphony. The clown's red balloons floated just out of reach, tethered to nothing yet perfectly balanced, and its grin widened, the edges stretching past what a human face could allow, revealing rows of teeth that shone even in the dim light of the sewers. Above ground, Wanda held Cyan close, her heart pounding, feeling the pressure of something vast and incomprehensible moving beneath them, aware that the child's life and the life of the man who had vowed to protect her were entangled with forces beyond human comprehension. Terence stood rigid, fingers gripping the steering wheel of the car as he tried to convince himself that bullets, fire, or any ordinary form of intervention could not touch what lurked below, and the knowledge sent a cold spike down his spine. Every instinct he had honed through years of clandestine operations told him the same truth. The only thing that could survive this night, the only thing that could protect the child, was the spawn himself, and only if he chose the path the creature had laid before him, a path of self-sacrifice.
Elle felt it then, the tug of the underworld, the pull of hell itself, a force that promised both sanctuary and power, a chance to shield Cyan in a way the mortal world never could. He knew that once he went, there would be no return in the conventional sense. Stepping into hell meant leaving behind the world he had walked as a man, the world of sunlight, cars, and quiet human conversation. Yet Cyan's presence was a tether, a reason to endure, and he allowed the pull to take him, feeling the cold, unyielding embrace of the abyss closing around him, chains of fire and darkness binding his form as he descended. Pennywise's grin faltered, narrowed into a frown of irritation for the first time in centuries, because its audience had refused to respond to its performance, and the spectacle it had orchestrated for amusement was slipping from its control. In the tunnels, the echoes of laughter continued, but it was a hollow sound now, lacking the sharp edge of triumph. Elle's absence left the space open and empty, a void where action had once occurred, and the clown shifted its form one last time, becoming a grotesque amalgamation of faces, demons, fallen angels, men who had tormented Elle in life, even fleeting glimpses of the terrible moments of Derry's own history. But there was no reaction, no gasp, no despair to feed upon.
Pennywise tilted its head, small movements rippling across its form like waves, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it sank back into the shadows, its laughter fading into a whisper, the red balloons drifting into corners of the sewers as if awaiting another time, another play, another victim. The clown returned to its long, patient slumber, a creature that could afford centuries of waiting, because it had learned, above all, that anticipation is as sweet as fear itself. Above, the town remained unaware, streets quiet, the faint hum of life continuing as if the night had not held such unimaginable events beneath its surface. Wanda breathed shallowly, holding Cyan close as they waited for Terence to start the car again, neither speaking for fear that sound might shatter the fragile sense of safety that now surrounded them. The child, however, seemed strangely serene, her small hands clutching the edge of Wanda's sleeve, eyes wide but calm, as if she understood more than they did, as if she had glimpsed the machinery of the universe in the brief moments of chaos and found that, for now, it could be survived. Terence exhaled slowly, feeling tension leak from his body like water from a punctured pipe, but he did not relax fully. He could still sense the shadows lurking just beyond perception, and he knew that Derry never truly slept, never truly forgave,
and never truly let go of those who had crossed it.
The descent of El into hell was not violent. It was deliberate, a surrender into the depths that both consumed and empowered. He felt the familiar heat and weight of his eternal prison, chains of fire coiling around him, spirits of the damned reaching out in silent recognition, and he allowed himself to be drawn fully into that darkness. Here, in this place of eternal torment, he could build a barrier, a conduit that extended upward to the child, a shield strong enough to deflect the reach of Pennywise should it awaken again before the bonds of protection were fully established. And as he sank deeper, the spawn's consciousness reached upward, touching the mortal world just enough to ensure that Cyan would be safe, that Wanda and Terrence would survive to leave Derry, and that the entity above could not touch what mattered most. Pennywise, left in its slumber, seemed almost contemplative. Its mind, if one could call it that, lingered on the absence of El's fury, the refusal to play the expected role, the denial of satisfaction. The clown's eyes, though closed in sleep, glinted with the memory of the fight, and somewhere in the dark, it laughed quietly. A sound more to itself than the world, knowing that the game was far from over, and that the time would come when patience could be rewarded with fresh terror. Red balloons floated in the emptiness like reminders, small, bright warnings that the city of Derry would continue to conceal its secrets and that those who walked its streets could never be entirely safe. Above ground, Wanda finally spoke, her voice low, trembling, but steady. She's safe, she said, more to herself than to Terrence. Cyan, still quiet, nodded, her small head resting on her mother's shoulder, eyes following some distant movement beyond the streetlights, seeing shapes and shadows that she did not yet understand. Terrence started the car, engine rumbling softly, and they began to drive away from Derry, leaving the crooked houses, the crooked streets, and the weight of centuries of darkness behind them. And yet, even as the tires crunched over the gravel, they all felt it. The pull of the town, the latent hunger beneath the streets, the sense that the night had not truly ended, that they had survived, but only temporarily, and that the cost of this survival had been higher than any of them could yet measure. El's descent into hell, the chains of fire wrapping around him, the screams of the damned echoing in the distance, was a quiet, deliberate act of sacrifice. He carried with him the memory of the child, the knowledge of the mortal world, and the weight of the red balloons, now suspended in the sleeping sewers, a reminder that Pennywise would awaken when the hunger returned. And though the abyss embraced him, he was not afraid. He was determined, resolute, knowing that the price of protection was eternal vigilance, that his absence in the mortal world was necessary, and that the child's life, fragile and precious, was worth the torment he would endure below. The town of Derry exhaled in silence, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, there was a stillness, a momentary peace, the kind that fools the human mind into believing safety is permanent. But in the sewers, where shadows coiled and the water lay stagnant, Pennywise slept lightly, grinning in dreams, waiting for the moment it could rise again, patient as the abyss itself, while El's chains tightened, the fires of hell glowing faintly, and the bond between the mortal world and the underworld held fast, fragile yet unbroken, a testament to sacrifice, endurance, and the terrible, unending hunger of creatures both mortal and immortal.